For the next session, we have Dr. Bikramjit Chaudhari, who is the MRSI Professional Standards Committee member and Senior VP and Global Head of Advanced Analytics and Data Sciences at Datamatics. He has held key positions in reputed multinational organizations like Nielsen, KPMG, Seven Dots, and ZS Associates, working in India and Europe. In his current role at Datamatics, he's working closely with the executive team and extensively with clients across BFSI, healthcare, retail, manufacturing, and telecommunications. Bikramjit will introduce a special guest speaker to us. So over to you, Bikramjit.
Thank you so very much for the introduction. Very generous on your part. All the kind words. Good afternoon, audience. Hope you had a lovely lunch. This is a session right after the sumptuous lunch, right? So some of you are possibly feeling a little sleepy, drowsy, might be considering a sort of an afternoon siesta, right? I can assure you that this particular session, where Judith will share her views and perspectives on why the code of conduct is more important and relevant than ever, now and into the future, will wake you up and will make you wide awake. I'm Dr. Bikramjit Chaudhari, Global Head of Advanced Analytics and Data Sciences at Datamatics. The first MRSI Professional Standards Committee in India was appointed on February 13th, 2020, and I have been a member of the MRSI PSC since then, since its inception. The term of this PSC was renewed in 2022, and the PSC is currently chaired by Dr. Derek Gray from BARC India. In addition to me, the other members of our MRSI PSC include Anjana Pillai from Quantum Consumer Solutions Private Limited, Ravi Kumar Narayanan from Dynata, and Avinav Goel from Nestle India. So what does the Professional Standards Committee exactly do? The PSC looks into the complaints raised against current MRSI members by research agencies, research buyers, research practitioners, and service providers. Complaints reviewed by the PSC are those of nature regarding a potential violation of the adopted code, guidelines, and standards. A project was undertaken by the MRSI Professional Standards Committee to refresh the MRSI Code of Conduct. After multiple deliberations amongst the PSC and joint discussions with the Managing Committee, MRSI members, industry veterans, external consultants, and ESOMAR, it was decided to wholly adopt the ESOMAR Code of Conduct along with its additional guidelines and recommendations. The decision was fully approved and duly approved by the MC and socialized to all MRSI members before the first launch in March 2023 on the MRSI website. A video on the code and guidelines is work in progress as a short course, test and certification to socialize the importance and build more awareness of the code in the MR industry. With this backdrop and quick recap in place, I would like to introduce you to Judith Passingham. To be honest, Judith needs no introduction. Judith has worked in the market research industry for over 40 years across many areas, including general management, client account leadership, service deployment, and operations. She started her career at BMRB on the TGI and media measurements, then AGB, subsequently TNS, responsible for the UK, then Global Panel Division as CEO of World Panel, and joint CEO Europanel, which was a joint venture between TNS and GfK. Judith was appointed CEO of TNS Europe, and then following the WPP acquisition, oversaw the integration of Research International and TNS in Europe. In 2014, Judith joined Ipsos to run its Access Panel services, where she integrated a number of local services into one global entity, launched device agonistic interviewing and programmatic sampling. In 2016, she was appointed CEO of Ipsos Global Operations. She retired in 2019 and volunteers for various social and ecological causes. In January 2020, she was appointed as chair of the Professional Standards Committee for ESOMAR and has overseen the initiation and update of a number of guidelines, including primary data collection, duty of care, and secondary data collection in association with GRBN, 37 questions for buyers of online sample, together with the launch of a project recommending best practice approaches on demographics, various papers and articles on the impact of AI on market research. Recently, Judith was involved in starting the industry Global Data Quality, popularly known as the GDQ initiative, and co-lead a work group on improving online quantitative questionnaires in order to improve research participant engagement. I can go on and on. The list is literally endless. So without further ado, with a thunderous round of applause, let's greet and welcome Ms. Judith Passingham to this virtual podium to share her thoughts and perspectives on the Code of Conduct and its growing relevance and pertinence. Over to you, Judith. The stage is all yours. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Judith Passingham and I'm the chair of ESOMAR's Professional Standards Committee. Firstly, to say what an absolute pleasure it is to participate in this important event and meeting. I'm very sorry I can't be there in person. The topic I want to address in this session is the importance, or the enduring importance, of the ICC ESOMAR Code of Conduct. And I believe that now it's more important than ever, and I want to explore the code and the reasons that underlie that opinion in the next 15 minutes. So the first piece of context globally is the rise of data privacy as a topic. And you've probably all seen those charts with data privacy legislation increasing, going up very strongly. And this table is from the Institute of Privacy Practitioners, IAPP, and it's presented as a kind of periodic table which gripped my imagination. And this is identifying the different types of privacy legislation. And it's categorizing the 118 most critical elements of data privacy and presenting them in an easily digestible format. And it shows you the sophistication of the topic, if you like. We've seen the first signs of this in India with the Indian Digital Personal Data Protection Act launched in August 23, but it's also a very relevant point for any Indian-based researcher engaged in multi-country research. So the second piece of context is about the confidence in our industry, confidence in researchers amongst members of the public. And this is example from Germany, and it, I think, sort of illustrates the impact that poorly designed questionnaires, long repetitive studies poorly designed for mobile environments, participants pinging around in routers and all of that kind of thing, have on the way that members of the public perceive market research. And this places an obligation on us, I think, to improve what we're doing. The next piece of evidence is about digital rights and principles. This example is a fantastic piece of market research data, something called the Eurobarometer, that's conducted across Europe on a huge sample for a very long period of time. And here we're dealing with control of data and safe environments where there's a very high level of dissatisfaction with current consumer perceptions. You can see on the purple bar there. Then the next piece of evidence, I think, is our ability to stand out within the consumer and participant marketplace. And this example gripped me, the MarTech map. And I think with viral social media, it's critically important to manage the perception of market research activities. So how can citizens possibly distinguish us and our industry from this sea of activity? And one way perhaps that they can distinguish us is how we behave as an industry. And this is where we can go back to the code. So let's look at the code in this context with these examples. So where did it come from? Well, the first self-regulation code was started in 1948 at ESOMAR's inauguration, and it was positioned as setting essential standards of ethical and professional conduct and safeguarding the rights of researchers to seek, receive, and impart information. So you could say that's quite visionary from the founders of ESOMAR. Very quickly after its launch, it was realised there would be benefit to both sides by building closer links with the International Chamber of Commerce, and this resulted in a joint code from 1976. I'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. And there have been very regular updates to reflect the dynamic nature of our industry and a number of changes. So if we just look a little bit more at the ICC relationship with ESOMAR, there's a lot of symmetry between the ICC Advertising and Marketing Code, which of course governs the enormous advertising and marketing industry, in a number of respects. The first respect is that we have the same definition of research in both documents, and that allows us to very clearly differentiate between the two different kinds of activity. We largely have the same client base. We are able to share expertise on the best approach. And also, and I think this is one of the most important points, it means we have added authority with regulators, because we've managed to develop a kind of currency here that we can approach regulators with. Moving on to the next slide, we benefit from widespread industry adoption, and both ICC and ESOMAR bind brands and research agencies to the code around the world, and signature to the code is mandatory to join ESOMAR and those associations which have adopted the code. And as a consequence, we benefit from widespread adoption, and it's got a currency value in the market. So we've got significant global reach, 12,000 individuals from our sector, 700 client companies, research buyers, have signed up to the code, and 64 partner associations. So if you like, feet on the ground locally, where 50 associations, including MRSI, have adopted the code, and 14 endorse the code alongside their own national code with some additional requirements, often to take account of additional special legislation or things of that sort. And then, of course, ESOMAR members are present in 140 countries on a worldwide basis. So an illustration of the importance accrued to the code. So here is what Ben Page, CEO of Ipsos, is saying about the code and why it's important to his organisation around integrity and transparency in handling personal data. And then from Ravinder Rupra, who's the Global Head of Privacy and DPO for Kantar, also a member of the ESOMAR Legal Affairs Committee, who sees the code as an important way of defending industry interests. So let's now dive a little bit more deeply into the code and look at what it's actually covering. So the code is based on three fundamental principles that characterise market opinion and social research, and provide what we call an interpretive background for the application of the substantive articles of the ICC ESOMAR code. And these are those. And so the first one is, when collecting personal data from data subjects for the purpose of research, researchers must be transparent about the information they plan to collect, the purpose for which it will be collected, with whom it might be shared, and in what form. The second point is that researchers must ensure that personal data used in research is thoroughly protected from unauthorised access and is not disclosed without the consent or permission of the data subject. And thirdly, researchers must always behave ethically and not do anything that might harm a data subject or damage the reputation of our industry. And so that, if you like, the code is organised around these ideas or these pillars. If we look at the code now from the lens of a number of different stakeholders that we've already touched on. So first of all, very importantly, with members of the public. And there are a number of specific protections of members of the public in the code. And these include things like protection of and duty of care to research participants, maintaining a very clear distinction between research and other activities, data minimization, so limiting the research that you're collecting to those items that are really relevant to the research. No harm, so that's special care when dealing with sensitive topics, and then special care in the design and execution of research for all vulnerable individuals, maintaining consumer confidence through this disciplinary process that I've talked about, and then points about primary data, so rigorous requirements that meet the test of most regimes on a global basis, and secondary data, increasingly important, data not collected by the researcher must pass the test of compatibility, legality, and a risk assessment to ensure no harm to the data subject. Very important point. Then moving on to another set of stakeholders, clients and end users of research, so the people that are buying research in the first place. And again, I've talked about this issue of common currency, and I believe it's very important, particularly for multi-country research. And within this, what I called a disintermediated supply chain, so where different organisations are fulfilling different parts of the research programme. And those include things like transparency in the design and execution, findings which must be supported by the data, whichever medium is used for the data collection or interpretation, and this point about the disciplinary processes that are recognisable. Moving on to another stakeholder with legislators. And the code provides a very important basis for solid discussion with legislators, because we're able to demonstrate that we're actually acting according to this central document. And there's a number of motivations for our industry here. We want to differentiate our industry from other adjacent industries. We want to make sure that we're not caught up in adjacent legislation, so unintended often, that we're able to secure derogations based on demonstrably responsible behaviour. And then reinforcing the point that we represent the voice of the public. And remember that many legislators, governments, decision makers in society are commissioning research. So that's an important point. And there's a couple of examples actually of success stories in this area. So gig workers getting tied up in legislation that's intended to tax people that could get caught up with participants, and then the fact that in the Indian data protection situation, that MRSI were able to use the code to potentially influence what was being done there. So I'd like to move on now to touch on some other guidance that we've worked on around the code. And this slide that you're seeing here illustrates the absolute proliferation of techniques. And it's impossible to generate new guidance for every new technique, and it would not be helpful to research users. So we've developed a principle-based approach as a pragmatic approach to cover this issue. And so on the next slide, you'll see the architecture. So a structure that we've designed to deal with proliferating approaches, methods, and data sources. So you have the code, which is the umbrella document, and then we have material that's designed to home in on primary data, secondary data, duty of care to research participants, and data protection checklists. 3 of these in partnership with GRBN. So those are designed for researchers to use when they want to go into more detail. Moving on to how we're going to refresh the code. So we're currently looking at how we revise the code, and there's various changes that we need to consider. This disintermediation point, who's a researcher, tech platforms, the fact that the ICC are updating their code, ISO standards, more detailed but necessary in some parts, and then of course AI, the all-pervasive AI, and how we're going to adjust the code to make sure it's up to date with what's going on there. Finally, just want to take the opportunity of highlighting some of the other activity that we've been driving. and those are available via the ESOMAR site. They're not behind a paywall, they're freely available, or you can contact MRSI Professional Standards. We work very closely with MRSI. And a few things, so we've been driving demographic best practice designed for multi-country work, so a very old problem, and we're having a bit of success there. So we've published age, gender, and recently working status, freedom to publish opinion polls, very recently launched in September, how to improve the experience of research participants, and keep an eye out for our AI guidance, which we're currently working on and hopefully will be published in the next couple of months. So thank you very much for listening, and I think it's now time for questions. Okay, so I think there's a first question here. So it says, the code is often not top of mind whilst we all believe we follow it. Maybe that's a statement rather than a question. I kind of identify with this because before I got involved in industry associations, I was a practical working researcher for many, many years. And so sort of, so I was reminded of this between, moving from a commercial research role to the association environment. I think one of the problems here is that perhaps working researchers don't realize enough about benefits that the code brings to them in terms of the reputation of the industry amongst research participants. And particularly, if I had to point to one thing, I would say it's our ability to argue for derogations from legislation. And because the amount of legislation is increasing, it's really important that the research industry is able to defend its patch. And a very good example of that is this gig workers thing I was talking about a moment ago. So there was a law that was going to come on in California that would have meant that research organizations would have had to treat research participants as employees. And anyone who's worked in the research environment would know how damaging that could be. And so we've taken that learning, working with the Insights Association, we're using it in Europe. It's now a problem in Canada. And so I think that those cases are a really important illustration of why codes and self-regulation is such an important part of what we do. So I think we've got another, what is the right balance between old school qualitative and modern tech? I'm not sure I know the answer to that question, actually. I mean, I think one of the reasons why market research is such an interesting and valuable resource is because there's usually a solution for any business or problem that you're trying to highlight. And so all these different techniques are available, and in fact, old-fashioned qualitative is now being reinvented for the 21st century with modern digital techniques. So I think the balance, I believe very much in fit for purpose. And so if the research solution is fit for purpose, then it's probably the right one. Yes, I see Are there any more? Okay, are there any more questions? Any last comments? I would obviously urge you to read the code and have a look at it and think about what it says and where it benefits our industry. And because we're starting this consultation process of how we make sure that the code is relevant particularly within the AI environment, then we're very keen to get views on how we can modernize it so that it's useful to practical working researchers within that context. So I think that would be my closing remark there. I'd just like to also thank you for having me, and I hope you found this useful. If you've got any questions, that you think of afterwards, if you feed them back through MRSI, then I'd be very happy to answer them.
Thank you. Thanks, Judith. And thank you, Mitali, for just coordinating with Judith on the questions. It was a great session emphasizing the partnership between ESOMAR and MRSI, and I think it was definitely critical that we all heard through what Judith has to say.